My name is Kimberly Fieros, and this is for Project 2 Philosophy of Art. So for this project, I went to the San Antonio Museum of Art, and that's how I found the painting for this project. So for a little bit of context, when I went to the museum, I brought some friends with me, and we were just walking around the museum. I took my time because I really wanted to enjoy the museum because I hadn't been to a museum in a while. And me and my friends were looking around, and as time kept going by, I kept getting more and more frustrated because I just didn't find a piece that I felt I connected with. I was really struggling. I was upset because I felt no piece resonated with me or what I really wanted to talk about in this project. So I was frustrated. And we had gone through like almost three-fourths of the museum at this point, and it was getting late, and we couldn't stay much longer. So we were just zooming through the rest of the exhibits. Um, and we were about to leave. And as we were walking out, there's like this small section right before you exit through the gift shop, and that's how I found the painting that I'm using for this project. The painting that I'm going to be using for this project was made by Albert Breestadt. Um, his name's German, so I don't really know if I'm pronouncing it right. But the name of the painting is Passing Storm over the Sierra Nevadas. And there's a little description that I would like to read about the painting. It's the drama of nature plays out in this monumental scene of a rainstorm moving across a mountain lake in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California in the late 19th century. Albert thrilled East Coast and European viewers with scenes like this of the western United States. Although the painter knew the area well from travels, particularly as an artist attached to an 1859 expedition to the Rocky Mountains, he often exaggerated the scale of mountains and ramped up the volume on dramatic contrast between light and shadow, all in order to captivate his avid public, many of whom only knew the West through exhibition paintings such as this one. So, as we're walking out, I see out of the corner of my eye this painting. I'm literally just scanning the walls, walking out. I see this painting and I audibly gasp. I'm like, oh wow, this painting is gorgeous. I walk up to it. I told my friends, hey guys, can you give me a few minutes? I want to stare at this painting. So my friends ended up staring at the painting with me. But I knew when I saw this painting, I was like, this is it. This is a painting I want to do. And I stared at it and I just fell in love. Like, it says in the description that Albert likes to play with light composition. And let me tell you, he is a master, at least in my opinion, of art composition. This is the thing that literally drew me to the painting. His art composition. It's so wonderful. It's so beautiful. The way the light reflects off of the water, off of the trees, off of the bank of the river, it feels so real. I literally wanted to step into this painting and I wanted to feel what Albert wanted the viewer to feel when they looked at this painting. And my friends agreed. Everybody loved this painting, and we talked about it and how beautiful the painting was. I like there's no words to describe how just wonderful. I when I look at this painting, it makes me feel at peace. Like I want to have the peace that Albert had when he was coming up with the idea for this painting, because the way like the light reflects off of the trees, off of the off of the bank of the lake, he just he's so insanely detailed in the way that he plays with light and the way that he gives like depth to the painting. It feels you could literally step into it, and that's why I absolutely love this painting. And it made me just excited because I love the way he just plays with it. I love the way he plays with the light. I love the depth he puts in the painting, how much depth there is in the leaves. It literally feels like he captured a moment in time and you could just step into it. So yeah, that's why I ended up choosing this painting for my project. So Kant's theory of genius. I want to start out with a quote from the Critique of Judgment, from section 46. He says, "Genius is the talent or natural gift which gives the rule to art, since talent as the innate productive faculty of the artist belongs to nature itself." So Kant believes that genius is something you are born with. You are either born a genius or you are not born a genius, and no amount of practice, no amount of skill can make you genius. Um, Genius is something you're born with. Genius is an innate talent. Excuse me. And Kant also gives four quote unquote rules that make up genius, and I want to talk about them. So, for the first rule, he says that genius is original and you cannot define it by rules. So, for Kant, genius is original. Genius is not something you make up. And I think it plays into the second point, which is art must not be from imitation and it must be exemplary. So, a work, one, has to be original. You can't be imitating somebody else's genius to create your own genius. You are either born genius or you are not, and you cannot imitate others' genius to create genius. That doesn't work. That will not make genius. And for my third point, there is no way to describe or scientifically understand how an artist made a work of art. So a genius or an artist, they themselves cannot explain to you how they came to make a work of art. The work of art made itself per se. The genius or the artist is, I don't know what the word would be, but they are the person who puts the painting together. Genius and the way that the painting comes together, the artist doesn't even know, because genius is an innate gift. So therefore, even the producer of the art piece themselves cannot know how it's done. It just happens to them. Genius happens to them. They just happen to be blessed that way. And a way to describe it, and it kind of makes you understand it, I think, a little bit better, is a fourth point that Kant makes, that there are only artistic geniuses. Learning, and there's this little quote from section 47 that I took, very tiny, which is, "Learning is nothing but imitation." So he uses the example of Sir Isaac Newton, saying that he was smart and he was called a genius, but Newton wasn't a genius, because geniuses are only artistic geniuses, because learning something is imitation. The things that Newton was doing was imitation. He wasn't being original. He wasn't coming up with original ideas. He was observing the things and the laws that were in nature and stating them. He wasn't coming up with his own ideas. He wasn't he wasn't being genius, at least in the artistic sense. So those are the four rules Kant gives for what makes art and what makes somebody a genius. You have to have these four things. And if you don't have these four things, then you are not genius. And I think there's another quote that I really liked. Yes, it's from section 48. "For judging of beautiful objects as such, taste is requisite. But for beautiful art, for the production of such objects, genius is a requisite." So to make beautiful art, to make fine art, which will play into the Kant's theory of beauty, you must be a genius. To create beautiful art, you must be genius, because you cannot understand it. You cannot create it originally, because you are not genius. And so that's kind of how I understood Kant's theory of genius. And as for how it pertains to my painting, that I'm doing the project off of, for me, I feel like Albert is at least a genius in light composition, if not everything else, because Kant, Albert does such a beautiful job of showing um, just detail. His the way he works, I could never work. And granted, I am no genius, obviously, but the way he plays with light, the way he plays with his, with the composition, the way he exaggerates everything in the right amount of detail to make the painting look so breathtaking, I consider that genius. In the way that you can tell that that's not just something anybody could come up with. That kind of work of art is not just something any person can do. That is definitely something that takes time and practice, if not innate talent, to be able to pull off. So, yeah. Kant's theory of beauty. So, I want to preface this one by saying I've had a harder time trying to conceptualize his theory of beauty, so I'm just going to try my best, and if it falls flat on its face, I'm sorry. I'm really trying. Yeah. So, with starting off, I want to start off with saying that Kant says we have two things. We have taste and we have sense. And with taste is what we can use to observe the beautiful. With taste, we can experience delight, or like we can experience, like, have a positive experience or a negative experience, and that helps us define the beautiful. And the beautiful is universally pleasing. The beautiful is not, when you're saying something is beautiful, you're not just, oh, this is beautiful. And when you're saying that, you're not just, you're stating the obvious, you're stating a characteristic of the object. This is beautiful. And that makes me want to read a quote from section 8 where he says, I describe by a judgment of taste the rose that I see as beautiful, but the judgment which results from the comparison of several judgments. Roses in general are beautiful, is no longer described simply as aesthetical, but as a logical judgment based on an aesthetical one. So we're logically basing our judgment on the fact that something is beautiful. And we talked about this in class. We brought up the discussion of the ugly versus the beautiful, and I think that's interesting. And I don't mean to go off on a little bit of a tangent, but in us in class talking about the beautiful versus the ugly, I feel like that kind of indicates how time has shifted and how people's perspectives are now sometimes more into the ugly. Because even Kant talks about portraying something in nature that isn't inherently beautiful as beautiful through art. You make it beautiful in the way that you portray it. And so I think that's a very important distinction to make, and I think it's a very interesting distinction to make as well. But back to beauty. And so beauty is purposive, and there's a purpose to it, and it has its own sense in and of itself. And it also has three kind of like characteristics, I would say. It has, the first is that it's agreeable. It pleases us, and it is deeply bonded with desire. So, like with my painting, at least with the people with me, we were all in agreement. So we had the harmony of the faculties, and the fact that we all agreed that this painting was beautiful. Universally, it was beautiful. We agreed to that. And then the second is the beautiful in and of itself. And it lies in between the agreeable and the third point, which is the good. It is also different from the others, and it's its own free delight. So the beautiful in and of itself is its own thing. It is not something that can be described in the other concepts, because it is in and of itself. It is a thing that is defining others. And then the last point is the good. The good pleases the reason aspect, and it has to do with respect. It is also bound with desire, just like the agreeable is. And good itself is its own concept. And so these, I don't fully know how to describe it or put it in a way that makes sense, but these things make beauty, and these things form how we make our decisions of what is beautiful. And kind of to summarize, I think Kant's theory of beauty is a really interesting one because he states that the beautiful is something that is character. It is its own concept in and of itself. And it's not something you place on it, it's something that is there. And when we as people can agree on something like that, we have harmony of the faculties. So we all understand that something is beautiful. I hope this makes sense, and if it doesn't, I'm sorry, but yeah, I tried my best. Okay, so I want to have a little section divided into two kind of parts, talking about Kant and nature and talking about Nauckland's critique on genius. I'm gonna try to keep this really short, but I could really talk about this for a long time. But it's at least interesting enough for me that I want to include it in my video. I'll really try to keep it short. So for me, I have some things I wrote down talking about Kant's theory of genius and how nature plays a role in artist inspiration of genius. And one of the quotes I really liked, I ended up reading section 45, the one before 46, because it was talking about nature and beauty, if I remember correctly. And there was just some really interesting quotes that I would like to bring up and ask you maybe questions or at least ideas. The first one is, nature is beautiful because it looks like art, and art can only be called beautiful if we are conscious of it as art, and yet it looks like nature. So nature is beautiful because it looks like art, but art looks like nature. So I feel like it's almost like a paradox in a way, that for something to look like fine art or art, it has nature in it, and art must look like that, but art must also look like nature. And I found that really interesting because I know that also plays into his theory of beauty, and it plays into his theory of genius as well. And those have two, and it has two um things that kind of carry along with those theories, but I wanted to talk about it itself because for me, I found it really interesting how nature plays a part. Because for Kant, he says that nature has its own rule in art, and it's important. I think there's another quote here. Hence, the purposiveness and the product of beautiful art, although it is designed, must not seem to be designed. Beautiful art must look like nature, although we are conscious of it as art. Section 45. So we know that this art is not nature. And for me, this also brings back to my Albert painting. He's depicting nature, and nature itself and is beautiful, right? Going back to the theory. But at the same time, the way he depicts nature in its own dramatized way adds to the painting because it is dramatized and it adds to the elements of the painting. I don't know. I just found it really really interesting. So I wanted to touch on it a little bit, and this is kind of going also a little bit off of topic of the nature, but I think it's interesting bringing up Plato in the sense that how Plato says that um, like would say that a painter like that is just being an imitator itself. And I find it interesting how um, Kant says if somebody is an imitator, they are not genius. But if nature is a true art in and of itself, would the artist not be imitating nature? And does that not make them not a genius? Or does it? Um, I don't know. That's kind of a question I have for that. So, yeah. I'm going to go talking a little bit about Nauckland, and then I'll try to finish this up because it's already like 4 minutes for the section. So I absolutely loved the article that we read for class. I loved it so much, and I loved the history and Nauckland talking about why she thought there were no great women artists of the time. And in a sense, I almost kind of agree with her. Not that there were not no great women artists, but that there were no great women artists like there were great men artists of the time. And that's because, as she states in her article, women were oppressed. Women were not given the ability to pursue art in the same way that men were. And they were not, like, she gives the example of nude models and how women were not allowed to have any form of nude models. They could not have male or female, and we talked about that in class as well. And we talked about how the female, but I nobody brought up the males. And I thought that was interesting because they weren't just allowed to not see, like, one, they weren't allowed to have any nude models. And she even gives an example of one of the professors, I think his name was Thomas, ends up bringing a cow for the girls to sculpt because they're not allowed to have any models. And I just think that's so interesting because these women throughout time, they were belittled. They were told that their pursuit into art was not the same as a man's, and that, you know, you have marriage to think about, you have a husband to think about, you have children to think about, you have other people to think about. You can't think about your own artistic pursuits. You can't do that because you have, like, these duties. And I just find it interesting. And for me, that it kind of, as to my own opinion, that I feel like the theory of genius is inherently classist, racist, and sexist. Because if we look at history and we look at the geniuses of around that time, what did the geniuses look like of the time? I feel like they look like a very specific kind of person in a specific way. And, you know, now people we call geniuses are looking more diverse, but even still, geniuses are still only tend to be a specific type of person, when in reality, for Nochlin saying there were no genius women is wrong, because there are genius women. There are genius artistic women who have amazing art, but at the same time, you know, there were not many women geniuses. There were not geniuses of color. There were not geniuses of varying like degrees of class. And I find that so interesting and topical to talk about because it's important. And I think the notion of genius, for how big it is still now, a topic that we talk a lot, and what we consider genius, oh, in the way that, you know, somebody invents something, oh, wow, they're so smart, they're genius. I think it's very important for us to talk about. And my favorite quote from Nochlin's article is, always a model, but never an artist, might have well have served as a motto of the seriously aspiring young women in the arts of the 19th century. That's so sad. Like, imagine just being told, like, you're aspiring young woman artist, and it's like, you know, you can't really do that. You're not going to be like these men of the time, these great people of the time. You're not going to be like them. You're not them. And you have all these people keeping you down and pushing you not to be like that. And I think it's very sad, but I also think it's very important for us to talk about. So, yeah, thank you for listening to this small segment that has nothing to do with kind of the project, but I really want to talk about them both because I found them both interesting. And yeah. Conclusion. We made it to the end of this perilous journey of making this dumb YouTube video. Not joking. This really difficult YouTube video. I filmed it once before and it kind of messed up, so I had to redo it, and that got me really upset. But we're here now, and I want to mention something real quick about my quotes. I'm going to go ahead and put them in the description for the YouTube video. But if you want, I could go ahead and submit it as well if you would like. But I'm going to try to put all the information, anything I quoted, inside of the description, because I'm only quoting Kant's critique of genius. No, Kant's critique of judgment. I think that's what it's called. And I'm using Nochlin's article. Those are the only things I directly quote. But yeah, I'll try to do that. And I really enjoyed making this video, even though it was very annoying. And I think it was a lot of fun. And going to the San Antonio Art Museum was also lots of fun. And it was a really great experience. And this piece of art, I hope you like it as well. I hope you like the painting I chose. But overall, this was a really fun experience, and I tried to put a little bit more effort into the editing. And, and yeah, thank you for watching. And if you have any questions or anything else, please let me know. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.